Welcome to Forecast Lab. If this is the first time you've joined us, this is one of the very few channels where you can hear the forecasts from an actual meteorologist, not just some random person that got a following on TikTok. There's less entertainment, less hype. Instead, we have more of a technical, intuitive slant with some old school techniques thrown in. If that's what you're after, well, you've come to the right place. Let's look at the current map. We've got Hurricane Francine coming inland. Why don't we start out first with a look at the radar imagery. This goes back to about midnight. We're looking at eastern Louisiana right there. We run that forward. It is a hurricane way out there in the Gulf of Mexico, but as we go into the daytime hours, definite spiral bands approaching the coastline, and there it is, the center of the storm. The latest update brings that up to a low-end Category 2 storm. Winds sustained in the center, 85 knots. That's close to 100 miles an hour. Let's take a look at the mesonet plots and see what's going on at the surface. It's not just the radar and the satellite that we need to look at, but also the observed data. In the lower right, we've got a number here. That's going to be the gusts. Is that miles an hour or is that knots? Well, they don't make it too obvious, but if we click on the plots, 54, that corresponds to a 54 mile an hour gust. So that's 47 knots, 54 miles an hour. You always need to check that when you're looking at data because there is a difference between the two. So we've got wind gusts up to over 60 miles an hour along Interstate 10 right there. This plot right here reporting that's some sort of, I guess, river gauge or something like that. 67 miles an hour sustained. We don't have a gust from that, but that is quite strong. So that's going to be a corridor of stronger winds right up there along the central Louisiana coast. We'll give you a look at the wind field from the GFS, making its way pretty steadily inland early this evening. By 1 a.m., starting to approach the southern border of Mississippi. Strong band of winds from Slidell all the way up to Hattiesburg, and that will continue moving northward into Mississippi early tomorrow morning and gradually into the northern part of the state as we go into the afternoon. The current surface chart for this afternoon does show Francine coming inland, central pressure on that 972 millibars and moving steadily northeast at 17 miles an hour. It will be moving inland into Mississippi later tonight and into tomorrow. There is a storm surge associated with that storm, 5 to 10 feet in between Vermilion Bay and Port Fourchon, with 2 to 5 feet for the remainder of Louisiana and Mississippi and Alabama. Elsewhere around the country, we've got a powerful weather system moving through the Pacific Northwest. Temperatures quite cool in the northern Great Plains, lots of 50s and 60s through Oregon and Idaho. Give you a better look at that, and quite a bit of rain from southern British Columbia all the way down into northwestern Nevada. Of course, not everybody being affected by Hurricane Francine. That's mostly a concern for the lower Mississippi River Valley. Elsewhere, we look at the upper level chart to see what's going to happen. This is technically the mid-level chart, about 3 miles above the ground, 5 kilometers. This is showing kind of a general key to what's happening. Large long-wave trough across the northwestern U.S., closing off into an occlusion over Washington state. Polar front jet coming into northern California, Nevada, and across Yellowstone National Park. So this whole area is going to be stormy over the next 2 days or so. A large long-wave ridge across the eastern U.S. The remains of Francine will be moving into that ridge, and of course that will slow things down. If we had a trough across the eastern U.S., that would lift the remains rather rapidly. So we don't have that kind of pattern. So we're going to see the remains kind of slow down and move into the Memphis area and maybe stall out a little bit. Of course, that means the potential for some heavy rains. We see widespread 3 to 5 inch amounts across Mississippi over the next 24 hours. Those rains pushing up into Tennessee for later Thursday into Friday, looking for 3 to 5 inch amounts right there. And then continuing on into eastern Tennessee, the Appalachians, and parts of the Midwest. So just kind of a mixed bag right there. The total 1 to 7 day inch precipitation amounts looks like they're heavily concentrated on northern Mississippi, northern Alabama. Those areas will get about 5 to 7 inches. Also, a secondary center off of the North Carolina coast, they could be getting 7 to 10 inches there with a separate weather system that we'll talk about shortly. A lot of rain in Montana, southern Alberta, looking for 2 to 4 inches up there with that strong Pacific system, interacting with tropical moisture that's recirculated around the north part of that cyclone. In the northeastern U.S., no problems at all. Looking pretty good for tonight. It will be a cold one. We're looking at lots of 40s and 50s across much of the northeast. Lower 60s on the coast. We're looking at 57 at Boston, 58 at Philadelphia, with 63 at New York. You can see quite a bit of wildfire smoke from Canada and the northwestern U.S. extending across the Great Lakes into New York and Pennsylvania. Across the southeastern U.S., well, where do we even start with this? Might as well touch upon those hurricane warnings, as we mentioned, Lafayette to the western suburbs of New Orleans. Hurricane warning inland into Baton Rouge, tropical storm warnings through southern Mississippi into Natchez, Macomb, Hattiesburg, and wind advisories all the way into Mississippi. Remember that this is the southeastern pine forest. Pine trees are rather brittle, and often they blow down onto the power lines. So even though there's not going to be a whole lot of wind coming inland, you should be prepared for the possibility of at least a few days of outages if you're unlucky and get one of those lines down in your area. Also a good idea to make sure your car is fueled up. Anyway, there it is, the storm appearing to come onshore as we record this. And we do have a slight risk for severe thunderstorms all along the central Gulf Coast due to the possibility of tornadoes in that highly sheared environment. We've got a tornado watch running from Lafayette to Pensacola. That includes New Orleans and Gulfport. Shifting our attention west into Texas, well, the Lone Star State actually getting some rain from this hurricane. Kind of rare to get this far to the west of a storm. And that's definitely pushing the temperatures down. Looking at 72 right now at Longview, 71 at Texarkana, 80 at DFW. But as you go towards Austin and San Antonio, yeah, they're continuing to bake in that Texas heat, 90 to 93 there, and rather mild out along the Caprock, but they will be warming up as we go into the weekend. A lot of storm activity starting to break out along the Rockies into the northwestern high plains. We have extensive red flag warnings all the way from Goodland up to Cheyenne, Rapid City, into southeastern Montana due to strong, gusty south winds as that Pacific system approaches. We see the other side of the story from the visible satellite imagery. This does definitely have a baroclinic appearance, and in fact, we can switch over to the water vapor imagery. Yeah, there it is, large comet cloud appearance. This is associated with the warm conveyor belt up in this area right there, feeding moisture into the system. We've got the dry slot working into the Four Corners area in Utah, so that's shut down the precipitation to a certain extent, and of course the Pacific air wrapping into the backside. And we can cross-check that with a surface chart. We do see that that warm conveyor belt is pretty far to the east, somewhere in this area right there, wrapping around the north side of the system, but the dew points rather elevated, 60s up into Pierre, Bismarck, upper 50s into eastern Montana. That's higher than in West Texas, where it's in the 30s and 40s. Further south, we've got the dry slot and actually some downslope flow that's keeping things kind of dry in this area. The trajectory is coming from the southwestern deserts, so we don't really see the warm conveyor belt down in this area. If we had a little bit of a deeper system, we might see the low-level jet set up, and in fact, I think we might have had a little bit of that going on, but just not tapping into that Gulf moisture. We've had the effects of the old polar high, which has flushed out a lot of the moisture on the Great Plains, and what moisture we have is coming inland with Francine. Up to the northwestern U.S., antifront set up across Idaho and Oregon. Very rainy days we mentioned. Let's take a look at the southwestern U.S. before we race to that part of the country. Yeah, there you go. Look how dry that is. In fact, some of that wildfire smoke from California appears to have wrapped up into the northwestern U.S. system. So that's taken quite a trip all the way to Salt Lake City, where conditions are probably kind of milky as far as the way the sky looks. And of course, we've got orographic storms going on, some residual moisture in the mountains helping to produce some storms. And of course, they've got the highly sheared environment as those prevailing westerlies come out into the central Rockies. And of course, the big dynamics up to the north, we can see the center of the circulation somewhere around Pendleton, Oregon. Plenty of convective annuals all the way from Rapid City back west towards Boise, Butte, and Bozeman. Further to the west, cold core dynamics across the Cascades into the Portland and Seattle area, but fair conditions along the Pacific coast. And as that Pacific air mass moves inland, we're going to see some cold mornings coming up for much of the Great Basin area going into tomorrow night and Friday. Taking a look out there in the Gulf of Alaska, we've got a few gale warnings offshore, but nothing going on in the interior. Just some clouds and rain, temperatures in the 40s and 50s as we've seen it over the past couple weeks. A strong occlusion moving into Nunavut. Still not quite cold enough for snow across the Canadian Arctic. A lot of rain spreading into Resolute, Pond Inlet, and Grise Fjord. And heading down south, air quality advisories continue for the Canadian prairies due to residual wildfire smoke. We've got a very stagnant weather pattern, and that's going to make the air kind of unhealthy in that part of the region. Elsewhere around Canada, we've got frost advisories for tonight in northwestern New Brunswick. Temperatures could come down to 34. That's well north of Fredericton. So how are the weather patterns going to change over the next week or 2 weeks? Meteorologists love looking at this. This shows the upper dynamics. This doesn't show precisely where the upper air motion is, but you can see certainly where there's strong processes going on, like right in here. That's going to be associated with a strong polar front jet coming into California and Nevada this evening. Some of the stronger upper level lift across the northeastern Great Basin region. And there's Francine coming on shore. That's going to be a low pressure or low height area in the mid levels. We don't find the upper level high, the ventilation in the upper levels. We don't see that until we get above 300 millibars. That's pretty high up in the troposphere. So going forward into tomorrow, strong dynamics rolling across Salt Lake City, Pocatello, into Yellowstone National Park, and then going into tomorrow, strong dynamics working on the northwestern high plains. So we do have a small risk of severe thunderstorms in parts of southeastern Montana for tomorrow. There's the remains of Francine heading up towards Memphis, but you can certainly see some of that blocking going on. There's a large upper level high. That's going to be a cutoff high across the Great Lakes. This is part of a large ridge that's going to be blocking the progress of Francine until something comes along and picks it up. Might be the southern tail end of that storm, but that is lifting up into Canada. So we'll see what happens. All right, going into the weekend, the remains of Francine continuing to hang around Paducah and Memphis. Another strong trough comes into the northwestern U.S. for Sunday. Look at that large area of southwesterly flow across the central and northern Rockies. Still got that blocking upper level high across the northeastern U.S., but it appears to be gradually moving to the east. This is a heck of a trough right here. Look at that thing. That's a large occlusion across the central Sierras. If this was the middle of winter, we would be talking about snowstorms in the Sierras. So this is a little bit of a El Nino type pattern. However, we are heading into La Nina for this winter, so don't let that worry you too much. Anyway, the dynamics moves quickly into the central Rockies and out into the plains, but you can see that continued northeastern trajectory. This appears to be the remains of Francine still hanging around. Let me go back and check that. No, that's this other system. Okay, so this is something that developed along that stationary front off the coast that could have tropical characteristics. We'll have to look at the surface charts for that. But that is the remains of Francine, and what happens to that shears out It just doesn't know where to go, and it gets trapped within this ridge right there, and it looks like it gets picked up and carried to the southeast, becoming kind of like a daughter circulation of this thing. Anyway, strong trough coming through the Four Corners area for Tuesday, and that moves up into the north central U.S. Another trough coming into California, so quite stormy there in California. Not really looking at a heat wave or anything like that due to that strong prevailing westerly taking over. To get that brutal hot weather in the southwest, we really need a large ridge, a large subtropical ridge, and this is the opposite of that. Anyway, that's all we have right there. A lot to look at for next week, and we'll just kind of take it in bite-sized pieces for the Friday show and for the Monday show. All right, let's take a look at the forecast. This is the GFS sequence with the fronts drawn on, and that's me that drew the fronts on. There's no model that does fronts, so this is something we do very special for this program, and I don't think you really get this anywhere else. So going into tomorrow, you can see the remains of Francine heading north. There's that Pacific system. Kind of looks like it's on the way eastward, but that is going to stall out and lose its definition. So you'll see that here shortly. There's the stationary front, and that's one reason I don't think that disturbance out there is going to be tropical in nature. I haven't really analyzed that into too much detail, but we'll see about that. This does look like a frontal zone off the southeastern coast. This other wave moves on up into Canada, tail end front through Wyoming into the central Rockies. Meanwhile, the remains of Francine moving up into the Jonesboro, Memphis, and Paducah area for Friday. We are going to see 100s return to Texas for Friday. Along the Caprock and the Edwards Plateau, we're going to see 100 at Amarillo, 100 at Childress, and 98 at San Antonio. Marginal risk for severe thunderstorms in Georgia and eastern Alabama, right in that region right there. Unstable weather pattern continuing with the remains of Francine and a sheared flow across that region. And I'll just take you very quickly through the rest of the sequence. I don't want to spend 10 minutes talking about this, but you can focus on your favorite area. This is what looks like a frontal system off of the coast. I mean, it may very well have some tropical characteristics, but we can reevaluate this on Friday and see what that does exactly. I do notice this little closed contour right there. That's kind of suspicious. But anyway, in either case, gusty winds very likely along the outer banks of the Carolinas. Out west, a succession of polar systems moving through that part of the country, plunging around the base of the trough and then moving into the northern plains. So looks like a lot of potential for episodes of severe weather in the northern plains and just showery and stormy in the central and northern Rockies. You can see that we do get this little wave moving out into the Great Plains for Tuesday and Wednesday, but once again, the bulk of it moves northward into Canada. Then we get to the end of the sequence, September 19th, September 20th, kind of an indeterminate weather pattern, some cold air flowing down in the Great Lakes area, and maybe a boundary along the Red River into western Kansas. One last look at our visitor from the Gulf, looking at the surface data. This is the very latest, and this video will be posted within about 5 to 10 minutes. So this, if you're just joining us, this is going to be fairly current data. Highest gust that I'm seeing looks like 58 knots, so I think the wind field is weakening just a little bit. Let's take a look at the radar. And there you go. It is making landfall, and I would say that is probably inland at this point. Anyway, yeah, keep in touch with the latest National Hurricane Center for the final word on what this is doing, the final intensities, and so on. But for the time being, heavy rains will be flowing up into the New Orleans area. Let's take a look at outages real quick. Yeah, this is the Entergy outage tracker, and I think it's one of the better ones online. A lot of utilities put up some very poor outage trackers. This is much better. We can see exactly where the wind problems are, looking from Shriver southward, and a lot of areas around the region west of the Mississippi River are down. Lafayette, however, everything is up. Baton Rouge and Hammond also looking pretty good, and just minor problems through the New Orleans area. Looks like one little outage around Elmwood, and another one just west of the downtown area. And that's all I've got for this episode, so thank you for joining. And please spread the word and let others know about this program. And feel free to become a Patreon supporter or pick up a copy of my books and software. All of that will help this program. Hope you have a great Wednesday night and Thursday, and we will see you back here on Friday for another edition. Take care. Bye-bye.